This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Herzog Foundation.
Time for school.
Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a new friend who's actually on this call in Toronto, where she lives, so Toronto, Canada. And she is Deani Van Pelt, Dr. Deani Van Pelt, and she is awesome because she wears lots of hats. I'm going to share a couple of the hats she wears, and then she's going to share the other hats that she wears. But one of the ones, and the main reason why we're having her on the podcast today, is she is the board chair for the Charlotte Mason Institute, which is based in the U.S., which we're going to dive all into that in a little bit. And she's also the president of Advanced Christian Schools Association, which is in Canada, which is a Christian school association up there. And she can dive into all of those things. But before we do all of that, I will pass it off to her to introduce herself. So, Deani, welcome to the podcast today.
Mitchell, it's great to be here today. I've really been looking forward to this.
We're going to have a lot of fun. And before we dive into everything, you get the question that I don't give anybody a heads up about. So this is going to be a good one. And actually, it's really going to be a good one because I've never been to Toronto before. So I start with this for everybody. If I was to ever visit Toronto, what would you say, Mitchell, you need to eat this and do this to experience Toronto? What would I have to do?
Okay, the thing you'll do is you will take the elevator up to the top of the CN Tower, which at one point in its history was the tallest structure in the world. So it's been outdone, but we're still pretty proud of our CN Tower and the great vistas it gives of Lake Ontario and also the city of Toronto and the whole surrounding region. Then you'll leave Toronto, you'll drive for an hour towards Niagara Falls, and you'll stop in a city called Hamilton. That's where I live. We've got some fantastic restaurants here that pride themselves on local food. And so you'll look for any restaurant that's affiliated with Pearl Hospitality. So they often buy old mills that were functioning in the 1800s, and then they restore them to the most beautiful destination restaurants. So you're eating local, you're eating healthy, you're eating some of the food of some of the finest chefs in this area. So Pearl Hospitality, come to my town, Ancaster, and go to Ancaster Mill. We'll go together and we'll enjoy some great local food.
I love it. So what's that local food? I mean, are we talking poutine here? If I'm pronouncing it right for you guys, what is it going to be?
Well, you're probably not going to see a lot of deep fry there, but so locally raised meats and just really great vegetables, lots of root vegetables. We pride ourselves in our berry produce, and then just the way they put things together. Just great, tasty, fresh food. Okay. And that's a lot, because it's winter here, an awful lot of months of the year.
Which I know you just got away to Florida for a trip. So I know to get out to go to the sunshine is nice sometimes. So,
sure is.
All right. Well, thank you. See, I use these recordings. So if I ever go visit these areas where I've had guests, I just go, what did they tell me I needed to go visit and what I need to do? So this is perfect. So thank you for helping me as a tour guide for Toronto. So before we dive into the nitty gritty and the questions that we're going to go over today for Charlotte Mason, give us a little bit of background, a story about you and who you are and kind of all the other things you dabble in your career.
Sure. So my education career is almost 40 years long, and I have loved school. I loved going to school. I loved studying about school, and got a Bachelor of Education, a Bachelor of Commerce, and then became a public high school math teacher. From there, we had some children, and it wasn't until I had kids that I really started asking some of the deeper questions about why we educate, and are we sure we've got this right? And I want to say to you, Mitchell, I've spent the last 40 years dwelling in those questions. Why do we do this? And have we got it right? And it has introduced me to some of the most profound ideas, many of which are actually common sense, and some of the wisest people in my life. So it's been a fantastic journey. I really hope I don't ultimately answer those questions because I'm enjoying the inquiry.
That's good. I love it. Well, what are some of the other organizations that you're involved with at the moment besides Charlotte Mason and then the Advanced the School Association?
Yeah, sure. So along the way, I became a university professor after or while I was receiving my PhD and following that. So got very involved in teacher education through working with a local university, Redeemer University College, which at the time we got some government grants and we were able to digitize the Charlotte Mason collection. More on that later. But we became a little bit of a hub of scholarship about Charlotte Mason. And I had just met her because I was, again, doing the inquiry about we sure we're educating our kids correctly here. And so I met her along the way, um, got to know the Charlotte Mason Institute, went to different ones of their conferences, and just really got into being quite enamored with the diversity of approaches to education that are available. So that led me into studying education policy. And so then, along the way, I've become a senior fellow at two think tanks that do focus more on the policy side of the question. And then I'm affiliated with two universities, one of which is the University of Cumbria, the University Charlotte Mason started back in the 1890s, and a scholar there in Charlotte Mason studies. So I've got that sort of philosophical side, but also the policy side, because, we can have all the great ideas we want about how to best educate. But if we don't have the policy and the regulatory structures within which to unfold and apply those ideas, then they don't get us too far. So love wearing those two hats, love being affiliated with organizations, institutes, universities that pursue those kinds of goals as well.
It sounds like you need a couple more things to be involved in. I don't think there's enough things you're involved in yet. So maybe a couple more board positions or something, or maybe start a couple schools. I don't know.
I love gardening and I love reading. I love children's literature. So let's tip in that direction.
I love it. Well, when we talked beforehand about some of the subjects we can talk about, which, by the way, those that are listening, we're going to break this up into 2 episodes. So we're going to be this episode 1, I'll talk about kind of like what is Charlotte Mason, which we're going to get into here in just a second. And the second one is like, how do you do Charlotte Mason education? And so come back obviously for next week's episode for that one, but this one's all about just Charlotte Mason. So kind of just start us out for this one, Deani. So we talked about this, like what is Charlotte Mason, but you specifically talked about it being like a relational education. So like what all is that together? And give me that the overarching view of what we're talking about.
Yeah. So when I met Charlotte Mason, it was in 1995. And it was actually through the lens of another person who had met her and was looking for an education for her kids where her kids would come alive and not come home kind of bored and diminished, but actually be awakened and more enlivened. And I resonated with that mom's journey. And in her book, she actually said that she found a school for her kids, and it turned out to be a small cottage school. And she started interrogating the teachers there, like, what is it that's so life-giving? Why are my children alive and seem enlivened? It seems like they have so many interests now. They're such interesting conversants. Where do you get these ideas, and why is your school so different? And it turns out that they founded this school on Charlotte Mason's philosophy. So that sent this author off into her own inquiry about, well, who's Charlotte Mason? But it also ignited my own. So the book I'm talking about right now, it's called For the Children's Sake. We could still fully, people are reading it. It's never been out of print since the mid 80s. For the Children's Sake kind of introduces us to Charlotte Mason. So through that lens, I got to know her as a philosopher of education that was extremely experienced, but also really practical. Her key ideas, Mitchell: children are persons. We'll talk about that in a minute. And children are built for relationship with God, relationship with people, and not just the people around them, but people who've lived in the past, the people in the present, people in the future, and then relationship with nature, relationship with the universe, and then relationship with self, which is really like a deep understanding of who we are as persons, but also getting to know themselves and developing character. So if you use this metaphor of relationship, that all of education should be designed towards creating relationship, you can just imagine what form of education that can ignite. And that attracted me very, very much, putting a child in relationship with the world. Prior to that, I maybe a little more exposed to systems that put the system first, the child had to fit, or that put knowledge first, child, open lid, pour it in. Here, have some more. closed lid. Now you are an educated person. But Charlotte Mason gave me this new view of how to understand a child and what our relationship is with the adults in a child's world, what our purpose is, what our responsibility is to the child to create those relationships. And the pedagogical ideas that come out of that, that's the thing about Charlotte Mason. She isn't just a philosopher. She doesn't just have principles. She has an incredible set of practices, all of which made a ton of sense to me. And I'd never encountered that until I got to know Charlotte Mason.
Man, so, all right. I know we're going to dive into more specifics here in just a little bit. So those that are listening that go, okay, maybe I've heard of Charlotte Mason, which I feel like when I've talked to most people in education, they've heard of it, but then to go into specifics, they don't know much about that part, which I think it happens with a lot of the different specifics in education. You got obviously classical, and you got Christian, you got Montessori and Waldorf. There's all these ones where like, oh, I've heard of that, but maybe they don't know all the specifics. And I think that happens with Charlotte Mason as well. So before we dive into all the, even the intricacies of what that is, who is Charlotte Mason? Let's give some background on just who she was and kind of where she came from and how she got into all of this in education.
Yeah. So I don't want to understate that I am quite impressed with her as a person. So thanks for the question. She's a fascinating woman. She's single for her whole life. She's born in 1842. She's an orphan by 1860, even sooner. So she's 16-year-old orphan. She gets picked up, gets a Queen's Scholarship, and goes to the only teacher training college, or one of the very few for women that are in the UK, in London at that time. So she's a person quite vulnerable. I think we could grant that. She's not raised with means. She's an orphan. She needs a way to be self-sustaining. So she goes to this first teacher's college. Out of this, so she dies in 1923. So over that next 60-year period of her life, she starts so many institutions. She writes 18 books. 6 are religious, like on the Gospel of John. 6 are on geography. And the 6 that I'm most interested in are on education. So she's quite prolific as she studies and as she learns and as she has experiences. Now, she's self-sustaining. So as soon as she has like a year of this teacher training, she heads down to the south of England. She's a teacher there for about 14 years in an elementary school. She's asked to start a girls' high school. Then she goes over and teaches at a brand new college for women educators for 4 years. Then she kind of has one of these breakdowns, that just has a period of regrouping. But during this period of regrouping, she starts writing all these geography books because she walks a lot. So she gets to know the contours of England. And I'm sorry, I can't help but show. It's called The 40 Shires, their history, scenery, arts, and legends. And it's by Charlotte Mason. And she was actually able to sell enough copies of this book, introducing children to the geography of England. She was able to sell enough copies that she could be self-sustaining for quite a few years. So that's a fascinating kind of entrepreneurship that she has. She understands the market and what's needed, but constantly she's inquiring about how can we do education? How can it be better? Because it was pretty dismal in that time, even though government had started funding it in England. She gives a series of lectures, Mitchell, which I wish I was there. My husband and I have traveled back to the site where she gave the lectures and just tried to understand the times and the place. 1885, it's a series of lectures to ladies. And that turns into, she gets so many parents around her that it becomes a book, there are thousands of copies. It's in constant publication. So it's called Home Education. That's the first of the 6 that she writes on education. After that, she inspires so many parents to her ideas that she ends up starting a union of parents. So now we're getting into the 1890s, okay? And those were the heydays of unionization as the world's becoming more industrialized. Well, a union of parents, interesting, right? So she puts the parents first as first educators. And so she starts this union, which ends up having chapters all across England and then across the world throughout her lifetime. She starts a teacher training college, a place for governesses and teachers to be trained. She starts a network of schools. She starts a curriculum. She starts a journal. The journal lasted for 99 years, publishing every single month. So I love her because she takes her circumstances and isn't diminished by them, lives within them, figures out how to network, and and I think most significantly, starts institutions that outlast her. I think there's a lot of leadership lessons in there for any of us that are interested in education.
Man,
So
I love.
she's an intriguing person.
Yeah, I love that so I never knew all this. So thank you for sharing about like she had all these ideas, put them to work. And I wonder how many people over the years, and we know there's obviously plenty that have had ideas, wanted to do something and just never did it. And so she's the one that's like, I have this idea, I'm actually going to do it and proceed. And she dabbled in a lot of different things, but she had a community around her with, which of course, any person of faith is going to say how important community is around you to help push you forward, but encourage you. And I'm sure she had that in all those parents and those people that bought into her vision. And so that is really exciting that it's also outlived her, of course, well over 100 years after her passing, that it's growing strong, which I would love to see. Do you know when it kind of made it to the States? Because obviously this is all happening overseas. When did it finally come over and start taking off here in the United States?
Yeah. So, I mean, her reach was global during her lifetime. Her curriculum was like mail order. So the students would send back their essays and then they'd be graded back at the main site of the university campus, which is in Ambleside in the north of England. So she did have a global reach. And at the time of her death in 1923, there were about 100 Charlotte Mason schools. They were called Parents Review schools that were established around the world. And there were dozens of chapters of the union as well, the Parents Union. So she did have that global reach, but there was a diminishment of her ideas. It got a little stagnated, I would say, like caught in her. Once she died, they tried to keep things the same. So by the 1970s, the union carried on, but by the 1970s, it closed. So, 50 years after her death, that's not nothing. And the journal kept being published in different forms. And finally, in the 80s, they stopped publishing the journal. But 1884 is when we read this book, or the book was published, called For the Children's Sake by Susan Schaefer Macaulay. And that book, again, revitalized interest in her ideas, and the majority of the uptake was indeed in North America. So that's fascinating. It's like her ideas got reseeded not in the soil of the UK, but in the US and Canada by extension. And then that uptake really happened in the 90s and then through the earlier part of this century. But now, again, it's global. There are thousands of people using Charlotte Mason's ideas in the UK as we speak.
Hey, school success makers, Mitchell here. I just want to take a really quick break from the show to give a big, huge shout out to the Herzog Foundation. I absolutely love the Herzog Foundation. I've been friends and partners with them for a couple years now, but we're bringing it to a whole new level. And I'm excited to share that our very own School Success podcast is now featured on the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network. The Herzog Foundation is a powerhouse of resources designed to support schools like yours, from free training events through the Herzog Foundation Institute to their incredible online news publication, The Lion, and of course, our new podcast, Home. They have everything you need to stay informed and inspired. And if you're dreaming of starting your own Christian school or co-op, don't miss their online course, Schoolbox. It's a fantastic resource to help you get started on the right foot. At School Success, we're proud to partner with the Herzog Foundation to bring you these valuable tools and insights. So visit herzogfoundation.com to explore all they have to offer. Trust me, you won't want to miss out on these amazing opportunities for growth and success. And I love all the people over there, and I know you guys will too. So please go check them out, and you won't be disappointed. Now, back to the show. Do you feel like with Charlotte Mason that it is bigger here than overseas now? Is it almost flip-flop from where it began to where it is now? Is there any numbers on that by chance?
Yeah, so we don't have precise numbers. I'm with the Charlotte Mason Institute. I can tell you that we work with about 75 schools or co-ops, most of which have just started up in the last few years. So if you figure she had 100 schools at the time of her death, that's a lot of startups that are gathered around. So those are around North America. But I would say it is much more global. We know of large groups of thousands of home educators in Indonesia. We know about groups in the Philippines, in Korea. So there are her ideas are being taken up. We know of schools in South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So it's really quite global in a way that's Spain, Portugal. So there are just these pockets. We know of quite a large community at the front lines in the Ukraine. So, I mean, everyone during this time of war is now home educating. So, Charlotte Mason's ideas are just so life giving. And one of the leaders there, she's right at the front lines, and she's got a group of over 1,000 parents that are working with her, and they're using Charlotte Mason's ideas, and they do send the most adorable. It's tragic, but the pictures they send, we're getting on with our nature study and our handwork, and children are still going outside, and they're just, so sometimes they're in the lockdown, they're all in the bathtub, right, just to be in the safest spot in the flat. But they're carrying on with their reading, and it's just kind of this like life-giving way. So we know of kids that come to school in the mountains of Tennessee barefoot to follow her ideas. We know of one of the highest end schools in Cambridge, UK, where kids most certainly come well heeled and are using her ideas. So her ideas are being applied in a variety of socioeconomic circumstances and in a variety of geographical settings around the world at this time. Is it possible that there's the widest spread ever of her ideas? I don't have the actual data, but I've got some good hunches that it's possible that today is the heyday of uptake.
And it's growing. From all the things I've already talked with you, it's growing and growing, and people are hearing more about it. And I love, with obviously technology out there, more are hearing about these different forms of education and what applies to, what would fit better with their family dynamic and their kids. So those that are, they've heard this, they say, okay, this all sounds really, really cool. It sounds really good, but we've talked for a while already. I'm wondering, can you give me an elevator pitch? And I usually try and do this with some of the other ones that are out there to go, okay, you meet somebody in an elevator and they go, what is Charlotte Mason education or whatever? What's that little hook of 30 seconds, 45 seconds to give them that nugget of going, oh, I understand now what it is. What would your elevator pitch be for Charlotte Mason?
I'd say it's a relational education that prioritizes the liberal arts and sciences.
Okay. Even shorter than 15, 30 seconds. That was even better. See, that's good. So you mentioned on our pre-interview calls about what the role of like the home is in Charlotte Mason and their child's education. And I love that you kind of talked about there's a role that the school plays, those that do go to school, or even those that are homeschooled, and how even if you go to school, the home still plays a role in that. I'd love to kind of, dive into that one a little bit and what you're meaning there.
Yeah, and this is a key takeaway for your listeners, Mitchell. When her first book was called Home Education, she meant that part of a child's education that takes place in the home. It's not homeschooling as we might understand it necessarily in our time. She values the role of parents as the primary and first educators of a child. And she suggests to us that the atmosphere and the environment that we set as parents, inviting children into moving into relation with the world around them, we as parents are key and critical to that. She says the child is a person, and that was radical, okay? 1885, you get up on a podium, you're a woman, and you say children are persons. In Canada, women were declared persons in 1929 from a legal perspective. Wow. So that was radical. So that meant they aren't just, jars to be filled. They are to be respected and understood as image bearers of God, and as fully formed humans. They're ignorant, they're not knowledgeable, they lack knowledge, but they have an ability, they are fully formed. And the whole point of education is that a child will become discerning, that they will choose, that they will have the agency to make right decisions, make right choices. So we set the environment as adults, as parents, create this life-giving home environment that honors the child as a person, and that sets the stage for helping them to navigate the world, to choose well, and to discern ideas well. So you can just kind of see that the parent ultimate, right, position, primary responsibility to create the atmosphere and the environment for the entirety of the child's life. And that includes decisions that are then made about the formal schooling.
What does that look like inside the home? And in her books, I don't know if she dove into that. Obviously, that was years ago. She wrote that book of like, has that changed a little bit in your eyes of like what that looks like in 2025 of like, okay, she wrote about that, but maybe there wasn't technology then, or there wasn't things like, is it Is there any differences, I guess, from then the book inside your eyes of what a home should look like and what it should be doing for doing Charlotte Mason for your family at the home?
Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, we are applying it. We're doing our best to apply it in the second quarter of the 21st century, right? So circumstances were different, but I would say her principles, a lot of them are they're completely transferable to our time. She doesn't want, for example, the world to be dumbed down to a child's level. She doesn't want us to diminish our language, our vocabulary. She doesn't want us to diminish the types of things in the world that a child encounters. She wants them to engage and follow us around when we're gardening. And she wants the child, for example, to spend 4 to 6 hours outside every day. So we can do that as parents to create as much out of door time as possible. She wants a child to be conversant with their hands, to be able to create, to be very comfortable making and crafting and aware of how to use quite a variety of materials. And as you can imagine, in our time with a lot of digital screens in a child's life, the manual dexterity and the ability to work with materials decreases if we're going to spend too much time in a digital environment. I don't think she would ever say don't. I mean, she had some of the modern technology of her time. We have a funny little saying, even Charlotte Mason had a wireless. So, she was hesitant about the automobile because they were pretty awful. She did prefer her carriage rides in the village, but she, and of course, there were only vehicles around for maybe the last 10 or 15 years of her life, but she always traveled by train. She was widely traveled. And we know that when she chose, so creating an environment, lots of outdoor time, lots of time using the hands and becoming, having more dexterity with manual abilities, but then being well read, creating a home that is filled with living books. And you might say, well, what are living books? So Charlotte Mason didn't just have a fixed list of classics that children should read, although she would be very interested in a child being conversant with the classics. But she wanted children to encounter ideas through story. And many new books she's writing in the golden age of children's literature, right? We're really just understanding what children's literature is. And she engaged that very much. So always looking for authors who were knowledgeable in their area, but then taught about it through story. So she would invite you as a parent and me as a grandparent into filling our homes with books that have beautiful stories, beautiful artwork, and that engage the child's imagination, put them in touch with the idea, put them in touch with the author, so that you and I can, again, just create the environment and the atmosphere and then get out of the way. That would be a transferable skill to the educator as well as the parent, so that there is that kind of fluidity and continuity between home and school.
Hey, I just want to take a really quick break from the podcast to highlight one of our amazing partners and sponsors, ClassReach. If you're a new school administrator or founder and are struggling to keep up with all the hassles of planting a new school, like collecting tuition, communicating with parents, or handling student data, then you need ClassReach. ClassReach is the all-in-one software that helps with everything from admissions and tuition to classroom management and parent communications. Sign up for a free consultation with one of their school specialists and see how ClassReach can help your school grow today. You guys can check them out online, classreach.com. They are a kingdom-minded company, and I love their leadership team there. I've become friends with a lot of them. They truly are a great company. I support them, and I love them, and you guys will love them too. Check them out at classreach.com. Now, back to the show. Are there some books that come to mind that are maybe the top 5 that you would say, oh, these are really good for the children's book side, for you should read these to your children, obviously maybe age dependent, but any that kind of come to mind that would be like the big ones?
Okay, you're really putting me on the spot right now. I don't have 5 offhand, but I will say one of the things that I've been looking for myself, because the hardest category is books for boys that are 9 to 12 years old. So I've spent some time creating a collection. And one of the authors there, her name is 𝐸𝑑𝑒, and her books are just so beautiful. So the child up against hard circumstances, right? And through courageous decisions, a person of character. I just love her books. I think The White Stag is one of them, but you'll look her up. For younger children, Clyde Robert Bulla. You go to the public library, you can't find his books, but if you can find them, so they're like introductory chapter books. They're so we've got some gems like that. I guess they're classics, Adam of the Road. There's The Door in the Wall. These are kind of set in the medieval period. Um, just beautiful stories, gorgeous pencil drawing illustrations that the public library has forgotten to include in their collections. And so were those books in print when Charlotte Mason was creating her book list? I'm not sure, but they definitely are living books. And at the Charlotte Mason Institute, but at many other places, organizations that promote Charlotte Mason's ideas, you'll find these book lists with these gems of these quality living books.
Would you count Narnia in one of those as like a one they should be reading?
I put that right at the top of the list.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Obviously, I know you and I were talking about that with my son. We listened to that and then watched the movie and really enjoyed it. And so I love those. And so I know there's going to be those that maybe are listening, and you got different opinions, of course, in education, where you're going to have some that go, well, at a certain age, then introduce fantasy, introduce things that aren't actually real. And so I would love to hear just your side on like what's happening to the child's brain when they're listening to these things that aren't real, like these, talking about ghouls and goblins or anything that they're using their imagination. But how do you, the argument of like, well, how can they tell which one's real and which one's fake in life when they're reading these books? How would you kind of have that discussion with somebody who maybe has a differing opinion on that?
Whether it's real or fake maybe doesn't matter. Maybe is it true is really what matters. And I think children are able to discern even if something is implausible in terms of it being real. It can be true. So I'll give an example. Charlotte Mason suggests tales of the imagination, scenes laid in other lands and other times, heroic adventures, hair-breadth escapes, delicious fairy tales in which all is impossible, and they know it, and yet they believe. These are books that children would read and they would live over and over, and they would play at by the hour, as we have all played at, Charlotte Mason says about herself, as we've all played at Robinson Crusoe, finding the footprints. They would have the joy of living in far lands, in other persons, in other times, a delightful double existence. And they would play, vigorous, healthful play in its turn, fully as important as lessons regarding both body and brain power. And you've probably seen that in your own children, right? You read these beautiful stories, and what are they playing? They're playing out, they're reenacting what they've read in these stories, whether they're implausible or improbable, and yet still so true.
That is true. And like hearing him play when he just like on his own, one-on-one, even he'll play with the neighbors, which I know I was telling you about them that they do Charlotte Mason next door, but just hearing them do imagination play it's so fascinating just to listen in and watch and like where their mind's going and what they're acting out. And they usually don't need any toys for that either. It's just imagination, and they'll find something. Like he found a stick yesterday in the yard and he said, "This is my torch, Dad. This is my torch." And he's like, running around the yard. I love that stuff, the imagination play. And just this morning, I read this stat. I thought it makes you kind of take a step back and go, man, like that's really good. It talked about whether it's accurate or not. I didn't actually fact check it. It talked about 4% of the child population in the world is in the United States, but the United States accounts for 40% of toy purchases in the world. And I was like, so we don't have as many kids, but we buy almost half the amount of toys. And it said what your kids really want. The article was talking about what your kids really want is they just want to play with you. They don't have to have the toy, because the toy you're going to buy and you're eventually just going to throw it away. They're not going to use it. They'd rather just play with each other or play with you. And so I thought that was really good of like, man, I love playing with my son, and he would rather do that than play with a toy, maybe play a board game or read a book. He would rather do those things than play with a toy. So it kind of reminded me of that article I just read this morning.
Amazing. Yeah. You know,
So
Charlotte Mason, as when she wants children to be in nature, she does want them to find things and she wants them to know the names of things, all the plants, the animals, the fish, the insects, the butterflies, the birds, the trees within, you know, a mile or so radius of where they live. So creating this relationship. And one of the things that maybe it's not always possible if we're going to public areas, but is to bring home some little artifacts and then display them out. And so really have this nature display area, but it's items that they've found, little bits of stick and rock and shell, etc., that just bring that indoors inside. And it's amazing how they, you know, return to those natural items and those become maybe not toys, but part of their environment and their love.
I love that. And that he naturally does that because he'll just find a random rock. He calls them, he actually did this with our neighbors. They find these shiny rocks and they call them crystals and they're magic crystals. And he's like, Dad, I was like, okay, all right, let's see. What are you thinking here? You know, where's this coming from? But he'll like find rocks, find sticks, bring them home. And I love that. All the, again, the imagination play. And so you mentioned, and I think we'll kind of probably end with this one for episode 1, talking about like the relationships. So we're talking about relationship with others, relationship with God, with nature. All, what does that look like when we talk about how, we were made for, I think we were created for relationship. We were created to have that community. And so what does that look like and how do we kind of play that out in like when you're talking about the Charlotte Mason form of education?
So thanks for that question. It's really great. It's a full curriculum. It's a rigorous curriculum that includes many different subject areas. So the child is exposed to the biblical narrative, the classic Bible stories. They're read to from the Bible in just its own original language. We don't have to do condensed versions or Reader's Digest forms. Read selected stories, let them engage with it. Art appreciation, or what Charlotte Mason would call picture study. So we just live with various 6 or 8 pieces of art by certain artists. We don't focus so much on the artist's life, but actually building a relationship with the painting, the picture itself. And then there's certain ways of doing that. Poetry every day. Just read the same poem for 5 or 10 mornings in a row. They'll soon know it. So careful selection of poetry, careful selection of art, biblical stories, music, so exposure to beautiful music. That again, when we study history, try to have the history and geography and literature, have living books, beautifully illustrated books with beautiful stories. Maybe what we're studying in history, we study the geographical area. So try to have it as intertwined as possible. So a very full, rich curriculum. Mason would have them at younger ages, just several hours a day, but like short lessons, 10, 15, 20 minutes, move on to the next, keep things moving, and then have long hours in the afternoon for handiwork and for outdoor play. So I think setting, another metaphor she'll use is the banquet. So create the feast, lay the feast, make sure it's generous, because children have a right to knowledge and it's our responsibility to supply them with that. Can we force feed them on everything? No, we can't, but we can certainly lay the beautiful banquet. And that's what creates relationship. You've seen your child, you introduce them to a piece of art, and then you go to the museum and you've seen it. I just had it with my grandchildren. They're just running, they're booking it through one room to the next room to the next room till they get to see Whistlejacket. And then sitting down with the horse Whistlejacket that they've read about in books. And then they sit in front of him, 4-year-old granddaughter, for 45 minutes drawing Whistlejacket, a field and some flowers and some friends, because he's just a horse. You know, he must be lonely. And so just in love with this horse because we've introduced her to the painting. I don't even know who the artist is. We haven't focused on the artist. She couldn't tell you who the artist is. But it's that sort of building that relationship in so many directions of the curriculum. This furnishes the child's mind with images and pictures and sounds and words. Reading aloud, of course. The cadence of words. You know the adjectives they give back to you. And then finally, narration. Oracy is critical. A classical education prizes rhetoric, they would call it. In a Charlotte Mason education, I think we would call it oracy. It's the ability to narrate, and narrate back. And by narrating, you're not just telling what you know about a story or what happened in the chapter, you're actually making it your own. You're assimilating the knowledge. So it's not really a test when you narrate, it is part of the learning. But through vocalizing, telling back the story, often using snippets of the author's language and vocab, this is how a child becomes educated.
Man, see, and I told you we could talk about this for a long time. See, it's easy, it's just flowing naturally. So to make sure we don't go over our time for episode 1 and to make sure we leave time for episode 2, let's do this for a quick wrap up of episode 1. What would you say, those that listening, they've grabbed, okay, this is what it could be like at home. This is who Charlotte Mason is. This is what Charlotte Mason relational education is. They kind of get a grasp. But if we were to end with like one kind of a piece of advice, maybe for those that are listening going, okay, maybe how do I apply this or something they can do with it? If we kind of leave with like one major takeaway for them before we close this one out, what would that one piece of advice or tip for them be?
Remember that the children you are to work with, that you are invited to raise or educate, remember that each child is a person. Remember that your responsibility is to build and invite them into relationship with God, with the universe, and with other people, past, present, and future. And know that you are not alone. You lay the banquet, you set the environment, and then you can step aside. You can stand back. Masterly inactivity is one of the things that Charlotte Mason calls us to as the adults in a child's life. Let's be masterfully inactive. Let's set the table and then step aside and watch what happens.
Great ending for an episode 1. I love it. So I'm going to say thank you for being on, but I know we're going to do another one here in just a second when we cut this one off. But obviously, Deani, thank you for taking time out of your day to come on here and talk about Charlotte Mason and what all that is. I think we're going to have a lot of listeners enjoy these episodes because we haven't had one yet on Charlotte Mason. So this is kind of exciting. So those that are listening, you didn't miss anything because on the past 150 episodes, we have not had anything on Charlotte Mason yet. So Deani, thank you. I know we're going to hop off here for a second, then hop on another one, but appreciate you taking some time today to teach our listeners about Charlotte Mason.
It was great to speak with you today, Mitchell.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Deani for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what she's doing over at the Charlotte Mason Institute. I'm wishing them nothing but the best as they continue to help schools and spread Charlotte Mason throughout the country and beyond that probably too. Obviously, if you guys heard in the episode, that was episode 1. So come back next week for episode 2 as we kind of finish off this little mini series on Charlotte Mason. It's going to be a good one because as of recording this part, we've already done number 2. And so it was really, really good. So make sure you come back next week for episode 2. It's going to be awesome. So before you guys go, I want to share a couple of our free 3 resources for you that we want to make sure you're tuning into. And of course, the first one is what you're doing right now. It is the podcast. Weekly episodes drop every Monday morning. So if you're not yet subscribed, and you want to be, you should subscribe because it's completely free. We do a lot of work to bring you guys this content. So we'd love you to be subscribed. And if you love the content, we'd also love a 5-star review. That would mean the world to us as well. And then on our website, schoolsuccessmakers.com, in the top right-hand corner, there is a button for you to sign up for the School Success Report. It's a weekly email we send out with some teacher articles we've written for school administrators and teachers, as well as some shout outs for different administrators as well. Really cool one to make you guys more successful. So we'd love for you to be getting that in your inbox every single week, and it's free. And the last but not least free one is our Facebook community called School Success Makers. I'm personally in that group. Would love to see you in there as well. You can ask questions, connect with other school leaders across the country. Great place to be. So make sure you join School Success Makers on Facebook, and we'll see you in there. All right. Well, I think that's all I got for you guys. So we'll be back here next week with episode 2 with Deani. So make sure you tune in then, and we'll see you then on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Herzog Foundation.